Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see me and hear me well. So a very warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Hannah Swee, and I'm a climate change expert with ICAT. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar on transparency for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Just before we begin, a quick note on some of the practical aspects of this webinar. As you may already have noticed, you are muted with your camera off. So if you do have any questions, comments, or you want to get in touch with us, please do so through the Q&A function, and you should see this at the bottom of your screen. So just click on that button and you can submit comments or questions throughout the webinar over there. Also, just a quick note on interpretation. This webinar will only be available in English and there will be no interpretation options. So some of you may see a button for interpretation on your webinar screens, but just note that this has not been enabled and the webinar will only be in English. So in terms of our agenda for today, we will start with some opening words by Henning Wooster, the Director of ICAT. This will be followed by the first presentation of the webinar, introducing Article 6 by Sadamitsu Sakaguchi from the Article 6 Partnership, which is under the Ministry of Environment of Japan. We will then have a presentation on the links between Article 6 and transparency by Oleg Bulanyi from the ICAT Secretariat. Following this, there will be presentations on some country perspectives. So firstly, from Vietnam by Quyen Tang from the Department of Climate Change under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. And then from Norway by Per Stensen from the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Norway. And finally, after these presentations, we'll also have some time for some question and answers. So now I'd like to hand over to Henning to say some opening words to start the webinar. Over to you, Henning.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning and also warm welcome from my side. Happy to see so many colleagues, friends and partners connected. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar. Today we are exploring a topic of great importance for countries as they advance with their implementation of the Paris Agreement. Transparency for cooperative approaches under Article 6. Before I go there, let me just briefly introduce to you the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, ICAT, at least for those of you who are not yet familiar with us. ICAT provides countries and regions with tailored support and practical tools to build and apply their climate transparency frameworks. Frameworks that are needed to collect and analyze data, to plan, monitor, and report on their climate actions. And all of that with a view to improving policy design and to advance the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We work with over 50 countries across the globe, and I'm very pleased to see some colleagues from those countries in the list of participants here. And we develop tools and methodological guidance to assist countries in these efforts. The guide on transparency for Article 6, which will be the focus today, is one of those guides that we have published. So why are we talking about transparency and Article 6? Article 6 allows countries that are party to the Paris Agreement to cooperate in achieving their NDCs. Cooperation can enable reductions in the cost of implementation and thereby increase the ambition of NDC targets. So there are clearly significant opportunities in engaging under Article 6. But it's also important to understand that there are risks and many pitfalls. And there are some challenges. By explaining the links between transparency and Article 6, we want to support developing countries to prepare for an effective engagement that allows them to reap the benefits of such cooperative arrangements. Transparency is indispensable for Article 6 activities. Let me just highlight 3 aspects: planning, accounting and reporting, and building confidence. On the first, Article 6 activities need to be firmly anchored in the planning of a country's NDC implementation. Article 6 may significantly change the NDCs for the participating countries. By enabling higher ambition, it will also increase NDC commitments in some of the countries. Therefore, monitoring and reporting of Article 6 activities must be fully integrated into the planning and tracking of NDC implementation. Rushing into quick Article 6 deals is not a good idea. Planning needs sound data on the NDC actions in the country and on additional mitigation options that can be subject to an engagement under Article 6. Secondly, on accounting and reporting. Article 6 comes with a host of accounting and reporting requirements, and you will hear more about that. To comply with those, countries need a robust national transparency framework, which can then be expanded to account for Article 6 activities as a basis for required reports. So there are also significant requirements under the enhanced transparency framework, but with Article 6, these become even more demanding, and it's critically important to be well prepared for that. And thirdly, transparency is what builds trust among nations, and this trust lays the ground for successful cooperation. A solid transparency framework is essential to demonstrate to partners in the global market the value of what a country can offer. Hence, it's a critical foundation for cooperation. So you will hear more about these points and others in this webinar. And you can find out even more from the ICAT guide that we published earlier in the year. The guide, Transparency for Cooperative Approaches under the Paris Agreement, is meant to assist countries in navigating the links between Article 6 and Article 13, which is the article that regulates the enhanced transparency framework. The guide helps countries explore opportunities for engaging in activities under Article 6, and it will take the reader through the benefits and risks related to non-market and market approaches and highlight how participation in Article 6 impacts a country's NDCs. It spells out in detail the transparency requirements that come with Article 6 engagement, adding to those that countries already face under the enhanced transparency framework. I trust that you will find the guide useful. Today's webinar will give you a good introduction to the guide and some impressions on how countries are approaching their Article 6 activities. So my special thanks go to our speakers for their valuable contributions. And many thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks, Henning. And as you did mention, I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of those points that you've highlighted throughout the presentations that are coming up. So I'd like to introduce the first speaker for today, who is Sadamitsu Sakaguchi, Assistant Director of the Office for International Cooperation for Transition to Decarbonization and Sustainable Infrastructure at the Ministry of Environment of Japan. Sako is responsible for capacity building for the implementation of Article 6 and negotiations on transparency under the Paris Agreement. So Sako, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I hope you can see my screen. As introduced, my name is Sako. and I work on capacity building activities for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement at the Ministry of Environment, Japan. So today, as in the agenda, I would like to briefly explain Article 6 and introduce the activities of the Article 6 Implementation Partnership, which is the multi-stakeholder mechanism established at COP27 last year. Hold on. Hey. Okay, so there may be some who don't know much about Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, so I would like to start from the brief introduction of what it is. At the Mr. Ooster's opening remark, he mentioned a lot about the Article 6 and also linkages with NDC. So there may be some overlap, but I'll just explain the even though there may be some overlaps. So first of all, under the Paris Agreement, which was adopted on December 2015 and also entered into force on November 2016, it is mandatory for all parties to prepare and maintain nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which represent greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. In Japan's case, the country aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 46% in 2030 from 2013 level, and set the long-term goal of net zero emission by 2050. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement stipulates our market mechanism for the international transfer of emission reductions to promote efficient global greenhouse gas emission reductions. After long discussions and negotiations, the implementation rules for Article 6 were adopted at COP26, and the detailed rules were also adopted at COP27. So now Article 6 is moving from the discussion phase to the implementation phase. So what kind of impact do we expect from Article 6? So according to the NDCs submitted by parties, more than 120 countries have mentioned the use of Article 6, and this is quite a large number. Experts have estimated that implementing Article 6 could reduce additional 4 to 12 billion tons of CO2 emission per year by 2030, which corresponding to 10 to 40% of global CO2 emissions in 2018. Also, implementing Article 6 has potential to stimulate global carbon markets as well as private investment. According to some reports, size of carbon markets will reach 300 to 400 billion US dollar in 2030. Okay. So from now on, I would like to explain the Article 6 Implementation Partnership. The Article 6 Implementation Partnership was established at COP27 last year to promote international collaboration to build Article 6 related capacity, including by sharing good practices and supporting the implementation of Article 6. The structure of the partnership reflects the interaction between stakeholders who will play an important role in this partnership. So this partnership doesn't only focus on countries or international organizations, but it also targets private sectors, research institutes, regional alliances, and so on, which actively work on carbon markets. The areas work under the partnership include to facilitate understanding of Article 6 rules and linkages with NDCs, which is the box on the right hand side, and also share good practices for institutional arrangements, develop an information platform, and so on. The number of partners now counts 69 countries and 34 international organizations, which include UN agencies and multilateral development banks. To further strengthen our efforts for the Article 6 capacity building through this partnership, MOEJ exchanged the letter with UNFCCC Secretariat as well as the World Bank. Okay, so this table shows the distribution of the countries in each region. As you can see, partners are participating from all over the world. As the partnership is to promote international collaboration on capacity building through the exchange of good practices, it is crucial to have the participation of entities with different backgrounds. And we still remain open to other interested parties to join. So we're happy to have your interest. Okay. So this slide explains planned activities for the partnership for year 2013. Sorry, 2023. Sorry about that. Taking into account the decisions of the detailed rules for the Article 6 implementation at COP27, in order to successfully implement Article 6, the partnership launched thematic working groups, namely authorization, reporting, and tracking. These thematic working groups are mainly targeting governments and international organizations, but we're open from audiences from other entities as well. The purpose of the authorization working groups is to support countries' authorization. And the reporting is to support developing initial reports and annual and regular information. And for tracking, it is to support developing national registries. So activities also include the technical assistance, such as practical hands-on training and mutual learning. And as for the information platform, we have created a website, which is also available on the QR code on the top right corner, where we disseminate case studies, good practices, and also information on the Article 6 related events, including this working groups. Also, together with ICAT, we're planning to organize capacity building activities, particularly for private sector. So this is currently underway. Okay. This slide shows the proposed timeline for the year 2023. We have finished the first series of the working groups in May, and we're now starting the second round from this month, actually next week. We're aiming to finish the second round by COP28 in November, so that we can present the outcome at the COP. And so second round will start from next week. So if you're interested, we highly appreciate your participation too. So, and working groups have been held on virtual basis, both first and second round. And but in the future, we're looking for face-to-face opportunities. But this year, only the virtual basis. Okay, so for the next 3 slides, I would like to briefly explain what we have discussed in each first working group. For implementing Article 6, there are a series of processes as shown in the slide, and the authorization working group will cover institutional arrangements and authorization, which is process number 2 and 3. In the process of institutional arrangements, relevant members and ministries should be identified, and policy frameworks need to be developed, targeting designated national authorities, government organizations, and private sector. Consultation, material development, and workshop will be provided. At the authorization process, we need to know what to authorize, whether it is projects or credits, and identify the necessary information and procedures. Potential capacity building can include improving understanding of rules and processes, matchmaking, material development, and workshops. Together with other processes, so process number 1 through 5, we will combine this set of outcome documents as a support package. For reporting, support will be provided to 3 types of reports that parties are required to submit. Those are initial report, annual information, and regular information. There are important milestones for each report, as you can see from the text on the box on the right. So this is kind of like a direct linkage you can see between Article 6 and 13 of the Paris Agreement. For initial report, the guidance on Article 6.2 says each participating party shall submit Article 6.2 initial report no later than authorization of ITOMOS from a cooperative approach, or where practical, in conjunction with the next biannual transparency report. For regular information, the guidance says each participating party shall include as an annex to its biannual transparency report. So as I said, this is the direct the linkage between Article 6 and 13. So right now we're in the middle of the transition period, and there are a number of supports needed from parties. So potential supports include illustrative text, sharing of lessons learned, and so on. Okay. So this is for tracking. There are a number of tracking tools available from various entities, including international organizations, countries, private sector, and so on. What we are planning to do is to compile information on these available tools. This will make easier for parties to decide which tools are relevant for them. Okay, so this is my last slide. So in order to promote capacity building activities of Article 6, in response to the outcomes of 2023 G7 climate ministers meeting, the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center was established. So this partnership is actually under the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center, not directly under the Ministry of Environment Japan. So just wanna correct that. So Policy Research Institute located in Japan is responsible for the management of the center as a secretariat. And UNOCCC Secretariat and the World Bank will also play an important role. With this management structure, the center will develop capacity building support package. Yeah, so this is it from my end. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And if you have any questions, you can either email us on the screen or you can visit the website. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Sako, for that introduction to Article 6, as well as the overview of the work that the Article 6 partnership is doing. Just a reminder to those attending this webinar, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit them in the Q&A box at any time. If you have any questions on the presentation that Sako just gave or the presentations coming up, you can do that straight away in the Q&A function. So the next presentation will look in greater depth, more specifically at the links between transparency and Article 6, and will be presented by Oleg Bulanyi, Senior Program Officer with the ICAT Secretariat. Oleg coordinates the development and implementation of ICAT strategies and regional and country projects. Over to you, Oleg.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are. My role today is to walk you through the Article 6 opportunities and risks through the lenses of transparency. And by transparency, I mean the national MRV frameworks, everything related to the data collection, data processing, and data reporting related to NDC design, implementation, and reporting under Article 13. So I'm planning to do that through walk you through the basics of Article 6, and then to highlight the key concepts of cooperative approaches that might be relevant for designing the strategy for engaging in Article 6 activities, and then move into the what we believe is important for preparation for Article 6 engagement. And then to stop for a while on what are the links, direct links between Article 6 and Enhanced Transparency Framework. And then, of course, I will give you the reference to the ICAT guide, where all these topics are explored in a much greater details. So I assume that all of participants of this webinar are aware of what's Article 6. So I wouldn't go into details of the three options that are available to the country parties under Article 6. I would just to highlight that the idea behind the Article 6 was that, and is, that it would provide economic opportunities, and it would reduce the abatement cost of mitigating 1 ton of CO2 if country or private sector and other market participants would cooperate in achieving mitigation goals. On international level, that would definitely bring some economic opportunities and economic savings. On the national level, it could allow countries to introduce new technologies. It would also allow countries to engage with the private sector, which otherwise might be left behind the climate action. But as any opportunity, it comes with a risk, and those risks are very important to consider before a country would engage in Article 6 activities. And for that, we believe transparency frameworks and data management system that are designed for inventories and NDC tracking could be very helpful. On this slide, I would like to highlight the text that is in bold in the text that quote the Article 6.1, that the voluntary cooperation under Article 6 is designed not only to implement the national determined contributions, but to allow for higher ambition. And that's, for me, is a key word, that it should not be considered like a just market mechanism, but it should allow for higher ambition in a way that country would maybe reinvest some of the outcomes of Article 6 into the new mitigation and adaptation actions. And also, of course, it should promote sustainable development and environmental integrity. So it may look that Article 6 looks very much similar to what was the flexible market mechanisms under the Kyoto Protocol. However, it has quite a few concepts that make it very different, and that concepts may bring some risks to the countries that are engaged in Article 6. And I would like to highlight just two of them that to me seems to be the most important. Those are corresponding adjustment and emission balance. And that's the new concept that makes a very strong link between Article 6 and NDC. So you can see on this graph, it's a very simplistic figure that represents the developing country that engaged in Article 6 activities and would like to make a transfer of internationally mitigation outcomes. So under the accounting rules of Article 6, that country would need to quantify the emission balance of the emissions covered by NDC before the mitigation activities and after the mitigation activities. However, after the transaction is done, the corresponding adjustment would apply to the emission balance of the transferring country, and therefore the adjusted emission balance would bring country to effectively to square one and very far from NDC target. And to me, that should be considered as a main risk of engaging in Article 6 activities for transferring countries, which is not meeting the NDC target at the end of the NDC period. On the international level, the risk could be that the ITMOs are used twice if the accounting system is not robust enough. And that's another risk that as an international community, we should really be careful with those transactions, and that would require the very credible, robust, and transparent registries and other mechanisms for accounting. With that in mind, I would like to highlight some suggestions that could be useful for countries that are considering engaging in Article 6 activities, which important before you start the actual implementation. So in a way, it can be called the Article 6 engagement strategy for the country, and it should probably start from the question why. Why Article 6 is so critically important that country would like to engage in it, and whether the cooperative approaches would really help in not only achieving the current NDC targets, but also help in increase the ambition of the next NDC update. Also, it could be useful to have an answer to the question how Article 6 activities could support the long-term strategy, and national development strategies in a way it would help to achieve SDGs. If the answer to those questions are positive and the country would really decide to engage in Article 6 activities, then the next question could be to select one of those three options available under Article 6. It's important to say that those are not mutually exclusive, and the country could engage in the combination of thereof. However, each of that option imply certain requirements on the participating countries. For example, approaches under 6.2 are very much flexible. It assumes that two countries would set own rules. What's important is to respect the accounting requirements that outlined in the COP decisions. The rest could be left to the countries to decide how they want to cooperate and what amount of ITMOs would be transferred from transferring to acquiring country. That flexibility would also apply to baseline setting, to eligibility requirements for for possible project activities or policies. However, that would also mean that that rule would only apply to cooperation between two countries and would not be easily replicable to cooperation between other countries. Under 6.4, which is very much similar to CDM, that issue is addressed, and it's supposed that the countries would use the very credible, adopted by supervisory body of 6.4 mechanism methodologies. They would also apply the project cycle guidelines and verification and validation requirements as well. So in non-market approaches under Article 6.A, the benefit is that this option doesn't involve the transfer of ITMOs, so the risk of not meeting the NDC target is eliminated in that way. However, it has also own drawbacks. Maybe not all benefits could be accessible under that option, but that's still to be explored further. So once the decision on how to use the Article 6 for national benefits is done, then the next step would be to design the policy framework. And the policy framework might be quite complex in the case of 6.2, a bit maybe easier in the case of 6.4, where some of the functions are will be done by the UNFCCC bodies. However, still many questions should be answered when designing the policy framework. Just to name few, as coordination between the line ministries, different mandates, who will assess the eligibility criteria for project activities, who will monitor the activity style, how to deal with the monitoring and evaluation on the national level, who will be the bodies responsible for validation of the project activities outcome, and whether the enough capacity in the country to run the registry and reporting. So the policy framework would all the avenue for the institutional framework, which is the next step. So basically, in that step, a country would need to consider the roles, responsibilities, and whether enough capacity to support the Article 6 activities. So if you consider some activities like assessing of the project proposals, assessing the monitoring reports, running the registry, it's easily can be built up to the additional department in the Ministry of Environment. And it's last but not least that mechanism should be sustained over time, and it should the institutional memory and capacity should be considered as one of the important topics. That's the example of how the institutional framework and the processes could look like on the national level for 6.2 and 6.4. Like, as I said, the assessment of the project proposals, engagement with the private sector, which is very important, and one of the benefits of engaging in Article 6 activities. So each of these processes would require the expert and institutional capacity from the participating countries. So it's really the big undertaking ahead of many countries. So those are difficulties that many countries may be facing in the short term. But then I would like again to highlight the role of the transparency and the role of transparency frameworks that might help to overcome those difficulties. So as I said, because of the new concepts which are the emission balance and corresponding adjustments, the Article 6 activities are very much linked to NDC under Paris Agreement, in the contrast to what has been before under the Kyoto Protocol. And that make possible to use the MRV frameworks that's being built, or they're being built for GHG inventories, NDC design and NDC tracking, also for Article 6 activities. So these are the processes that are needed for Article 6 is the estimation of annual level of emissions covered by NDC, which is very much similar to GHG inventories, though it might have different scope. And then the process of emission balance recalculation based on corresponding adjustments and information needed to highlight the SD benefits as an outcome of Article 6 activities. All these processes can be incorporated in the existing MRV framework, the national MRV framework that is used for national inventories and NDC tracking. And by doing that, countries may find a lot of synergies between the processes and also make the accounting and policy making more consistent. So Article 6 activities would be embedded in the NDC update cycle more effectively, allowing for higher ambition. That was the main purpose of Article 6 under the Paris Agreement. So by integrating, so that was the accounting and tracking processes. Now we are coming to reporting requirements under the Paris Agreement. And here is the picture is very much similar, that by integrating reporting requirements of Article 6 into reporting requirements of Article 13, a country may find a lot of synergies and avoid a lot of duplication of efforts. So you see on the left-hand side, the National Transparency Framework as a blue box, and that is very central. So you see that it informs the BTR, it informs the Article 6 initial report, and it may inform the Article 6 annual information. So that should be considered as centralized, like a dispatch center for all the data, all the processes that are used for reporting on inventories, on NDC tracking, and on Article 6 activities. With that in mind, countries would really save some capacity that is needed for other purposes. So to summarize what I have said so far, that the national transparency frameworks are very critical to the success of Article 6. That is not because of only reporting under the Paris Agreement, under Article 13 of Paris Agreement. It's because it is needed to design the policies. It is needed to decide what sectors would require support from Article 6 activities and what sectors can be implemented on the national level without external support. Also, the robust national MRV frameworks would ensure the environmental integrity, and transparency would allow to build the trust between the parties participating in cooperative approaches, especially under 6.2, where two country parties are engaged in Article 6 activities. So all these topics are explored and presented in a much greater detail in the ICAT guide for transparency for cooperative approaches under Paris Agreement. You can either scan the barcode that is now on your screen, or you can go to our website and download the guide. And in the ICAT Secretariat, we're always available to answer your questions on how to apply this guide practically. And we are open to any suggestions how to improve this guide in the future. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Oleg, for the presentation. I think really highlighting the critical importance of transparency for Article 6, and then also the links between NDCs and Article 6. And I think this really sets the scene well for the country perspectives from Vietnam and Norway that we will hear now. So I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Quinn Anh Tang, who is the investigator at the Low Carbon Development Center under the Ministry of Natural Resources in Vietnam. Quinn Anh is responsible for studying climate change issues, including assessment tools for climate policies, climate negotiations, GHG inventories, and MRV, and she is also supporting the work that Vietnam is doing to mobilize financial resources in relation to Article 6. Quinn Anh, over to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tan Quỳnh Anh, and today I'm gonna be share the Vietnam perspective of the transparency under the Article 6 of Paris Agreement. Today I'm gonna go through 5 main contents. The first is Article 6 and ITMO, and the corresponding adjustment for the ITMO, and the comparison between dynamic baseline versus the BAU scenario, and how the tracking the progress for the NDC implementation with the ITMO accounting, and introduce the case study of ITMO from solar PV of Vietnam. Next, please. So the Article 6, as all the previous speakers mentioned, is a voluntary cooperation in the implementation of the NDC to allow the higher ambition in the mitigation and adaptation actions, and to promote sustainable development and environmental integrity. The Article 6.2 recommends the use of ITMO, which is the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes towards the NDC of each nation. Next, please. And the scope of ITMO can be defined through the explicit and the implicit. The first one is to participate the Article 6 and to issue the ITMO. A nation should be a party of the Paris Agreement and has to be prepared and communicated the maintaining NDC. And the nationally authorized, and the ITMO should be a nationally authority for the mechanism under the Paris Agreement, and is indicated to the sub-body to the participation of the Article 6, and it should be the type of the Article 6 paragraph 4, which is Article 6.4, and the ITMO specifications is real, verified, and the additional mitigation outcomes compared with the ordinary mitigation outcome according to the NDC implementation. And the ITMO is the emission reductions and removals, which is in the metrics of ton CO2 equivalent on non-GHG metrics. And this is under the coversion approach of the Article 6.2, and it should be generated from 2021 onward. And the ITMO has to be authorized by a participating party to the Paris Agreement, and it can be used for the international mitigation purposes other than the achievement of the NDC. Next, please. So whenever a nation wants to apply the ITMO, both the issuance and the utilization, they have to be applied the corresponding adjustment, which is to adding the quantity of ITMO authorized and first transferred for the calendar year in which mitigation outcomes occurred, or to subtract the quantity of ITMO used for the calendar year in which mitigation outcomes are used towards the implementations and achievement of NDC ensuring that the mitigation outcome is used with the same NDC implementation period as they occurred. Next, please. So I will introduce the BAU. This is a concept that we use in every NDC. The BAU scenario was developed based on the medium economic development scenario, energy demand, GDP growth by sectors, GDP structure by sectors, population growth, forest and forest land planning, and the quantity of livestock and arable land. The revised 1996 IPCC guidelines for the national greenhouse gas inventories and the 2000 IPCC good practice guidance have been used to calculate and forecast the GHG emissions to the 2030. Regarding to the GHG emissions and removals in the LULUCF sector, the IPCC good practice guidance for the LULUCF sector in 2003 has been used to calculate and forecast for the GHG emissions and removal to the 2030. Next, please. So the ICAT developed the new approach for calculate the emission balance, which is a dynamic baseline. Dynamic baseline is a conservative emission baseline that can potentially be affected by the receipt of international climate finance. The potential updates to the baseline level is the provision of support by ensuring, for instance, the baseline level are dynamic so that can be changed during the crediting period. And the dynamic baseline is the transition from the BAU scenario to the BAT, which is the best available technology scenario. And obviously, the dynamic baseline is more ambitious compared with the BAU baseline. As you can see on the graph, the BAU emission is in the red line, and the dynamic baseline is forecasted with the more ambitious scenario with the best available technology development scenario, which is in the blue line. And so the emission balance should be calculated based on the new dynamic baseline compared with the project emissions. Next, please. So on the screen is a common tabular format for tracking the progress of NDC implementation, which is used the indicators like information on the reference points, levels, baseline, base year, starting points, and the updates on the any recalculation of the GHG inventory and the relation to the NDC. Currently, Vietnam only proposed several criteria, which is mostly qualitative criteria with the completeness status of each target we aiming to track the progress of implementing NDC. So the project with the collaboration between Department of Climate Change and ICAT proposed the accounting mechanism for ITMO in the tracking progress of NDC implementation. Next. So whenever a party wants to use ITMO, they should apply the corresponding adjustment towards NDC tracking progress. The first step is to calculate the mitigation outcomes from the mitigation options. The second step is to calculate emission balance with the mitigation options. And the third step is to calculate emission balance with NDC commitments. Next, please. So for the first equation, the emission balance is to calculate by the BAU subtract the mitigation outcomes for the NDC commitment and the mitigation outcome for additional mitigation options. And then the ITMO is calculated by dynamic baseline subtract the emission balance. I will show you more detail on the case study on Vietnam. Next, please. Next, please. This is a case study for the ITMO from solar PV of Vietnam. Can you move the animation? Yeah, so the first step is we identify the BAU according to our NDC and to calculate the emission balance of the energy sector according to the dynamic baseline. Next animation. Then the next block is the mitigation outcomes toward the NDC. Next animation. And the next block is the mitigation outcomes of the mitigation options, which is additional mitigation actions compared with the register mitigation actions of the NDC. Next animation. So we subtract the mitigation outcomes of the mitigation options from the emission balance of the energy sector according to dynamic baseline. And the ITMO can be calculated by the dynamic baseline subtract the emission balance of the energy sector. Next animation. Yeah, so this is, so the results is on the final round, which is BAU according to NDC, subtract the mitigation outcomes toward the NDC, and then subtract the mitigation outcomes of the mitigation options. Yeah, so next. This is a reference for my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'm willing to answer your questions.
Thanks, Quinnan, for that presentation. So not only looking at some of Vietnam's experiences, but also points such as the scope of ITMOS and corresponding adjustments, which I think is quite relevant for several of those attending this webinar. I'm seeing some comments and questions coming through from the audience on these points, so we'll try to address some of these later. So I'd like to introduce the final speaker for today, Per Stiansen from the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Norway. Per is a co-facilitator for negotiation groups on Article 6 and is involved in policymaking in Norway on topics such as mitigation, including domestic and international emissions trading. Over to you, Per.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning or whatever, and good afternoon. It's here, whatever it is where you are. Good to be around. First, I'd like to say that it was a great relief to land the framework on Article 6 in Glasgow, and I think that was enough for a number of countries to start implementing. And we've seen, for example, Switzerland coming forward with its first initial report, with also some partners that they have who have been authorizing activities. So it was very good to have that. We are refining the guidance. We did some work in Sharm. We're doing a bit more in Dubai, hopefully. And all of this is basically about transparency, and the transparency requirements under Article 6 is providing then consistency, and it's hopefully providing environmental integrity through the reporting, review, the tracking system, the storage of data, and all the other things that my previous presenters have presented. So thanks to Sako, Oleg, and Kinan on these things. It's indeed a lot to digest for us who want to participate in Article 6. I think regardless of whether we are buyers, sellers, or both, which we are. And the Norwegian, next slide, please. The Norwegian experience illustrates that Article 6 covers a lot of different situations, and many of them will probably evolve and be different from what we see today. So for us, I mean, we have at least 3 different ways into Article 6. We have our NDC, which is to reduce 55% compared to 1990 levels. That's mainly going to be implemented through cooperation with the EU, and that has to be framed under 6.2. We don't know whether we will import or export. We will probably import it most based on current projections. We will also have a national transition target for 2030, which is equal to the 55%. So if we manage to reach that, then we'll be in a neutral position vis-a-vis Europe. This is a type of cooperation that doesn't only involve 2 countries or 2 parties. It involves at least 3, 4 individual parties, Iceland, Liechtenstein as well, and then of course the member countries of the EU need to be, all of them, behind this. So there are lots of stuff to discuss between the partners. Then we're not sure whether this cooperation will bring us all the way to 55%. There is a chance that it will, and there is a chance that we will lack a percentage or 5, and that is up to the arrangements we will make for accounting for the various activities we have in Europe. It is very similar to the exercise we went through in Kyoto, where we had the cooperation on emissions trading and some netting out of the results towards the end of the period. But that's a homework to be done by us and our partners, and it's not trivial. I've done it before, so it will take some time. But in case we're not coming all the way to realize our NDC through the European cooperation, we will need ITMOs from outside Europe. So that will be a sort of safety valve for being sure that we can realize our NDC in time. And then another third perspective would be that Norway has vast potential for storage of CO2 under the seabed. We've started such an exercise already more than 25 years ago, so we've got experience from 1996 and onwards, and this is something that we are already discussing with some countries in Europe, whether it can be developed into something under the Article 6 with crediting if they pay for activities that would happen on our soil, and either they will transport CO2 to us and then we will store it, and or there can be, for example, direct air capture activities where things go straight from the air through some pipes to under the seabed, and these things may evolve under Article 6. We may keep some of the benefit and pay for some of it ourselves. We may have partners who will pay for some of it. It will take some time again to develop, but it's something that is being discussed. Then, in addition to and over and above the NDC, we've got the climate neutrality target, which kicks in 2030, and where there may be a need for acquiring units under Article 6. So, I mean, depending on how you define it, especially with the role of LULUCF, we may need several tens of millions tons for the next decade. It's impossible to know how much because this is future. This is depending on our inventory figures from 2030 and onwards, and removals, both emissions and removals. But it's there, and it may direct some involvement, and it may also be relevant both for 6.2, where we have some pilot activities now with the World Bank and the 3GI towards a number of countries. They have been under development for quite some years, and they are more pilots, and they involve both both ITMO finance and climate finance. Yeah, I will turn to the homework that we have to do, which has been mentioned by the previous speakers as well. So next slide, please. Yeah, we will have to submit our initial report. Most likely it will be in conjunction with the BTR next year, but we don't know. We have started thinking about the elements that has to contain. We have to choose a counting approach for our single year NDC target. So I mean, we have a choice between averaging and trajectory. We had a 30% target in 2020, so most likely it's relevant to have a trajectory from that target to the 55%. But again, it's not trivial to develop such targets or such trajectories, and they have to be consistent with what's developed by our partners, for example, in EU. So we have a long discussion there that has been started, but needs to be landed before we can produce the initial report. Quantification of the relevant parts of NDC is not that tricky for us. Neither is the metrics discussion. I mean, we're operating on a CO2 equivalent basis. But for some countries, this is a lot of extra work compared to what they're already doing. And 50, 60 countries have NDCs that are specified in a non-CO2 metrics. So maybe some of our coming partners will be in that situation. Then we have to set up a system for authorization of the ITMO activities. And the transfers and the ITMOs themselves, and whether we will authorize if we're host also for other international mitigation purposes, ICAO. That's especially for if we are to be hosted, will involve ministries relevant to carbon dioxide removal activities. So it's not a straightforward, simple thing, even if at the end, as in most countries, it will be one agency in charge of and one contact point in charge of authorization. We have to set up our national registry. We have had a registry system together with the European Union under Kyoto. That's very advanced. It's covering also the emission trading system and all the Kyoto functionalities. We trust we can build on that, but there is a possibility to turn to the international registry also for us, but it's unlikely we will do that. And then I'd like to remark that registries, they may be costly and they are often very advanced, but they don't have to be. I mean, our first registry was an Excel spreadsheet. Then in the initial report, we have to describe the various activities we're doing following the guidance that we agreed in Glasgow. So on environmental integrity, on baselines like Kinan described in the previous intervention. If we're entering into activities with reversal risk, we need to discuss how to deal with it. For example, for CCS, we would need to explain the responsibilities between us and our partners. So there are a number of things there. Two issues that haven't been discussed by the previous speakers. It's the OMG, the overall benefit for the atmosphere. How is that to be applied for a 6.2 cooperation? Is it going to be shaving off a percentage like in 6.4, where they take away 2% of the reductions for the benefit of the atmosphere, or do we do it in a different way? Then it's share of proceeds for adaptation, which is 5% of units in 6.4, but for 6.2 it's not that straightforward. There was a very difficult issue to land in Glasgow, but for us, I mean, the ITMOs that would flow between us and EU, they wouldn't be worth anything for other countries, so they couldn't be marketed. So we need to deal with the share of proceeds for adaptation, which is voluntary, in a different fashion than putting units from that cooperation out on the market. And we need to be able to explain that in our initial report. Then, in particular for host countries, we would need to deal with the preambular issues on human rights, on indigenous people, gender, intergenerational equity, etc. And for us, that's also an issue. If we're purchasing, we would always do diligence of the activities that we will enter into with our partner countries. Probably we'll also look for whether the LDCs and CIDs, if we're cooperating with them, what sort of issues come out from their special circumstances, if any. I mean, they haven't been pushing that very hard in the negotiations. But again, it's an issue to look out for. I think I'll stop there. I've probably talked for too long, and hand back to you again, Hannah. Thanks.
Thanks, Per. And I think that's given a really nice different country perspective to what we've heard from Vietnam. But I think also in both cases, really highlighting some of the important considerations and the work that needs to be done for countries who want to participate in Article 6. Great. So I think we are actually right on time. So we do have some time now for addressing some of the questions that have come through in the Q&A. So I want to go firstly to the first question here, which I think this one is more for Quinn Anne. So the question is, are carbon credits issued by voluntary carbon programs and authorized by host countries considered as ITMOs? So do they need to be tracked as part of NDC tracking? Or does the ITMOs cover only Article 6.4 emission reduction units and emissions reductions transferred under 6.2? So I'll direct that to Quinn Anne because you did talk a little bit about ITMOs in your presentation, but of course, if any of the other speakers would like to also join in on answering this question, please feel free to do so.
Firstly, I want to clarify that the ITMOs need to be registered through the national registry and need to be authorized by the host countries. So it should to increase the transparencies in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So I believe that all the ITMOs is tracked as part of the NDC tracking progress for both Article 6.4 and Article 6.2. So whenever a party want to issue or to use the ITMO, they need to conduct the corresponding adjustment in the report of the NDC tracking progress. And so am I clearly answer your question, Bell Hoan? If you have any unclear about my answer, you can raise your hand and respond. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Quinn Anne. And yes, if there's anything that's unclear, please feel free to type it into the Q&A and we can see if we can follow up. So there's another question that is about the emissions graph. I believe this is the corresponding adjustments graph that was shown in the presentation from the ICAT Secretariat by Oleg. So the question is, not sure I understood the graph that shows the emissions balance. Could you please provide more explanation? So Oleg, I'll direct that question to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hannah. For me, that's the main safeguards of the Article 6 on how to ensure the environmental integrity. And the corresponding adjustment and emission balance serve to transparently account for the ITMOs that's been transferred either from country A to country B or from country A to other purposes like, for example, ICAO. So once the mitigation activities are achieve their target and the mitigation outcomes are validated, so they are real, they are additional, following all the rules that adopted by the COP, then it's for the country to decide whether they would authorize the transfer of the ITMO. And once this transfer is done, the amount of tons of CO2 should be deducted from the national emission balance. So that was basically reflected on that graph. And by deducting the emission reductions from the national balance, it means that the national emission balance would raise to the point that was before the mitigation activities. So for me, that's first is a safeguard to ensure the environmental integrity, and then from another dimension, it is a risk that country may not be able to meet the NDC target if they would oversell the mitigation outcomes as ITMOs under 6.2 or 6.4. Back to you, Hannah.
Great, thank you. And I hope that answers the question as well. We also have received a lot of questions about the Article 6 partnership work, about particularly on how to join the partnership. And then there's also been a more particular question about capacity building at the country level. So I'll hand over to Sako to just quickly, I think, give a brief on how countries can sign up for the Article 6 partnership and the capacity building at the local level.
Sure. So you can go to the Article 6 partnership website that I shared on the last slide, and you can go to the very bottom of the first page. Then you can click the Join Us button, and if you fill out your information, then we will send you the email that you officially become a partner or like yeah, something like that. And about the country level support, so as I said, working groups are mainly targeting for countries, so like government officials and also international organizations, and also together in parallel with working groups, we are providing other support like sharing information and also hands-on training. So so those are the country-specific support that Article 6 are providing. Article 6 is providing. So I hope I answer your questions.
Thanks, Sako. And then we have another question that's particularly for Per. And the question is, it would be great if you can elaborate more on the experience from the implementation of the National Registry Tracking System. What worked well and what did not?
Oh, well, thanks. We have always been a Kyoto party with a commitment under Kyoto, and under Kyoto, the registry systems are quite regulated in quite some details, the functions. I mean, we spent some years, almost 20 years ago, to develop the rules for the functionalities in the registries and how to set it up. And then we have had like 3 or 4 iterations of registry systems in Europe. We are managing a registry system with about more than 10,000 trading partners, which is leaning on this. The Kyoto part of the registry is a small and fairly simple thing. I mean, covering what is similar to ITMO transfers under Paris. And the Paris, I mean, it's the ITMO transfers that are relevant, and you don't need a sophisticated registry system like what we have in Europe to do Paris. You can probably lean those countries who don't develop their own registries. They can hopefully lean on the international registry, which may be operated as some sort of mini bank or ATM machine, or not ATM because you're not getting the cash out, but some sort of of internet banking system with accounts for the countries, and then easy transfers to other countries. There is a discussion on what functionalities the international registry will have, whether it should just transfer information about the ITMOs, or actually carry the ITMOs from one country to another as well. That's hopefully to be landed in Dubai, and there has been a two-track perspective on that. So some countries may choose a system which can hold units, and other countries may choose system which is only carrying information forwards. The first system, the relevant or the Kyoto system would, and our experiences would be relevant. But for the second, it's something else which is needed, which is not so. We don't have the similar relevant experiences from Kyoto. Well, that's kind of different answer than the question, but it's the relevance of what we've done in the past which is most important, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Per. So I can see that we still have quite a few other questions, but we are running out of time. So I'll just let everyone know that this session is recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. And we will also try to get around to answering the other questions that we haven't been able to answer here, and get them to you via email later on. So I'd like to hand over back to Henning for some concluding remarks now.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks to the presenters for very enriching presentations, very stimulating ideas and thoughts. I think we also noted from the many questions that this has sparked a lot of interest, and thanks to all the participants for joining us and participating actively. Clearly, this webinar can only give you sort of a snapshot, a quick set of insights, and some ideas to think about and then reflect on further. I think what came out very clearly is that we are looking at different challenges. We are looking at both challenges in terms of policy and in terms of technical work. And I think that is important to understand. It's especially for developing countries, it's important to understand that Article 6 is very different from the CDM, where it was possible to look at projects in the country in isolation from national policy. This is not anymore the case under the Paris Agreement. And of course, for a country like Norway, that doesn't really constitute such a significant change. But for all the developing countries, it is a significant change. And I think you have to be cognizant of these challenges in order to be well prepared to reap the opportunities that Article 6 cooperation does entail for all countries. And I noted there was one question whether this also applies to Africa, and certainly it does. And we've seen that, for instance, a country like Ghana is actively engaging in Article 6 activities or preparing for it. So that it will certainly be relevant for all developing countries. But you have to, first of all, make sure that policymakers understand the opportunities, and they understand also that the need for an integration into the overall climate policy in the country. And that's the change that comes with the Paris Agreement, where The NDCs means that developing countries are developing a policy framework. They need to understand, and we saw that with the presentation from Vietnam, how the emissions develop in light of mitigation activities, and what additional mitigation options there may be that could be subjected to Article 6 activities. Once that policy choice is made, there is a need to set up the arrangements in the country to be able to manage it. And part of that is to have a transparency framework that allows really to respond to the requirements of Article 6 and the reporting under it. And we saw what Per Stiansen labeled as the homework that needs to be done, which is significant, and it's important to be aware of that challenge and prepare for it. It builds on what countries will do in order to submit their biannual transparency reports, but it requires a little extra on top of what is required otherwise. But one message that I want to leave you with in concluding is that you should consider integration as most important part of your strategy. Integrating Article 6 activities in the planning of your NDCs in your countries, and integrating it into the national transparency frameworks. So many thanks again for all the participants for a very interesting exchange, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. We are, from ICAT side, we are supporting countries in developing their NDC tracking frameworks, and some countries have started to also ask for support to integrate into that effort a preparation for Article 6 activities, and that's certainly something that we can then support through ICAT projects in countries. So many thanks for joining us, and back to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Henning. And I'll just reiterate now a really huge thank you to everyone who's joined, and also to our presenters today. So with that, I wish you all a very pleasant day or evening, and we can conclude the webinar now. Thank you.